Upon returning home from a strenuous day at the office, I discovered that my wife, Jane, was not present. I proceeded up the stairs, announcing, "I'm home. I'll be down now." This was a recurring joke between us, stemming from our initial encounter at a costume party, where I was attired as Tarzan. As I ascended the stairs, I nearly collided with Jane, who playfully interjected, "Tarzan, I'm sorry, but you are." Jane poked me in the chest and pointed a finger at her breasts, laughing. I learned that her name was actually Jane, and from that point on, we were known as Tarzan and Jane. We had been married for what I believed to be 5 years, and I opened a beer and sat on the couch, turning on the television. The evening news headlines were as follows. Jane walked down the stairs in a black dress that was a little shorter than the typical length of a little black dress. While the dress did not have the same degree of cleavage as a dress designed for a red carpet event, it was not skimpy. Jane was wearing a backless dress, which meant that she was not wearing a bra. Although her breasts were not entirely visible, the movement of her breasts still gave them away. She was also wearing the necklace I had given her for our anniversary just a month ago. I grabbed my phone to capture this vision for posterity, even though I did not know what I would actually need it for. I was unaware that we were dating provided an opportunity to refresh myself and change my attire. Regarding our plans for the evening, I have been invited to dinner and dancing by Robert Cohen. Given the lateness of the hour, I will probably be delayed, so I ask that you do not wait for me. Robert Cohen was banned from all company parties after he engaged in numerous romantic encounters. It is evident that Robert Cohen is not the type of individual who would engage in such behavior. He was merely an individual with a tendency towards rigidity and jealousy, which ultimately led to the creation of a tumultuous environment. It is also important to note that there is a similar level of emotional intensity present in this situation, as evidenced by the assertion that she would never allow him to date another woman. The marriage vows that we exchanged indicate a commitment to each other. I assumed that this was a value you also held. However, it seems that this is not the case. In the 21st century, it is uncommon to adhere to such traditional beliefs. It would have been beneficial if you had disclosed this information earlier, as it would have allowed us to pursue alternative options. She then proceeded to divorce her husband, stating that she wished to marry someone else. She then threw her head back with a laugh, following her husband to the door. I then grabbed an old friend from the closet as the Lexus pulled into the driveway. I then heard her say, "Here comes Robert," and I ordered myself a piece of cake or something similar. She then walked out the door. I then called out to her, saying, "Jane." I proceeded to remove her dress, leaving her in only a tight black thong and heels. She initially appeared frozen, but then proceeded to retreat into the house. I then approached the Lexus, tapping the Louisville bump stop on my left palm, while Cohen accelerated rapidly to exit the scene, nodding to my neighbors in acknowledgement. I returned to the house and returned the bat to the closet. I then retrieved a fresh beer, as the first one was already warm, and sat down again, waiting for the fireworks. I did not have to wait long before Jane came downstairs, wrapped in a robe, and she was visibly enraged. I was unable to listen to her ramblings, which were reminiscent of the impassioned monologues of Paul Simon. I was privy to a profusion of words that I had never encountered in the Bible. I remained silent until she had sufficiently composed herself. I inquired about her train of thought and the expectations she had set for herself. I asked, "What were you thinking? What were you counting on?" It seems that our lives have become so routine that we no longer prioritize having as much fun as we once did. I am perplexed as to how I am only becoming aware of this information now. Moreover, on the previous occasions when I attempted to persuade you to adopt a different approach, you were either too preoccupied or lacked interest, or even regarded the idea as distasteful. Even if one were to justify the act of infidelity, it is difficult to comprehend why you would choose to humiliate me in this manner. I did not wish to be untruthful, and thus believed that disclosing this information would not constitute cheating. This is the most absurd notion I have ever encountered. Engaging in sexual intercourse with another individual without my consent is, indisputably, a form of infidelity. "Perhaps you will permit it," she said, regarding me with a hopeful gaze. "I am at a loss as to your mental state. I must extricate myself from this situation before I say or do something that one or both of us will regret." I procured the keys and promptly departed the premises before she could exit her chair. I acted in accordance with the logical response one might expect from a man in my circumstances. I proceeded to my preferred drinking establishment to indulge in a moment of self-pity. "What is the matter, John?" Sam stated, "You appear to have lost your closest associate. In fact, you are not far from the truth." When I returned home this evening, Jane was dressed in a manner that indicated she was preparing for an evening out. She informed me that she was going to dinner with Robert Cohen from work, and that I should await her return. Naturally, you informed her of your refusal. I was taken aback by his audacity. I was on the verge of removing the grin from his face when he said, "I was just joking." What transpired next? She proceeded to relay the typical rhetoric about how I was not her proprietor and that loyalty was a concept from the Middle Ages. I surmised that this was the case. Your assumption was incorrect. I received this information simultaneously with the aforementioned events. The individual in question arrived at the location in question, and Jane proceeded to exit the residence. Your hypothesis is erroneous. I procured a persuasion tool from the closet, followed her, and removed her dress in a public area. She paused for a moment, then realized that her neighbors could see her in just a thong and ran back into the house. I went to the car with my persuader, waiting in Louisville, and he took off. It seems that this is a favorable outcome for you, so what brings you to my modest establishment? The victory was short-lived. I was sipping my beer when she came downstairs, pouting like a bear. Once she had calmed down, she began to speak nonsense once more. Our sex life was routine. It would not constitute cheating if she did not engage in sexual activity without my knowledge or consent. Sam was rendered speechless. At that moment, I decided to leave and thus found myself here. Sam opened a couple more cold bottles of beer. We clinked glasses and drank. I had another drink before deciding that I had better stop, rather than risk getting into an accident. "Good night and good luck, John." "Thanks, Sam. I think I'll need this." When I returned home, Jane was already in bed. I completed my evening routine, pulled on my pajama pants, and got into bed with my back to Jane. As I fell asleep, I thought, I heard her quiet sobs, but I chose to ignore them when I came downstairs. Jane was already up and preparing breakfast. The breakfast proceeded in a subdued manner until we finished cleaning. At that point, Jane began to speak again. "John, you must recognize that times have changed. It is no longer the norm for individuals to remain in a single relationship for the entirety of their lives. I am not alone in this perspective. Regarding the idea of remaining in a single relationship for one's entire life, neither of us were virgins, we dated others. That is not the point. We were still just children then, we barely understood what was going on. Now, we have more experience and more opportunities for comparison. I do not need to compare anything. In fact, I compared a great many things before I asked you to marry me. I did so because I knew you were the one I wanted to spend my life with. After you responded in the affirmative, you indicated that you felt the same way. Did you misrepresent your feelings? If so, what have you changed your mind about? If you wish to end the marriage, that is your prerogative. However, you cannot have it both ways. If you do not want a divorce, you will have to accept the consequences of your actions." Lowering her eyes, she said, "I don't want a divorce, so it's decided." I said, although. I was uncertain about the situation, although Jane asserted that she had abandoned the notion of pursuing another romantic interest. I found it challenging to accept her assertion. I was preoccupied with concern each time she arrived later than anticipated, particularly if she did not contact me promptly. I speculated that she might still desire an extramarital relationship, but this time clandestinely, and began to attempt to ascertain the truth. I did not engage the services of a private investigator or attempt to monitor her communications. I did not hire an investigator or bug her phone or GPS her car. Instead, I began stopping by for lunch on random days, calling her at unexpected times. I could feel the tension building between us, and I am confident that she could feel it too. It even affected our lovemaking. It was less spontaneous, more cautious, and without the passion that was there before all this started. Finally, I lost my mind. She was taken aback, but I believed that we were on good terms. "Do you think that everything is fine with us and that we are close to where we were before?" When everything was fine with us, she lowered her eyes and shook her head. She informed my parents that this was the hardest thing for them to understand. They could not comprehend why we could not resolve our issues. One day, my in-law confronted me. I presented him with a photograph of her in which she was partially clothed. Dressed, he acquiesced, and we were subjected to a plethora of inquiries from the family. I permitted the wine to flow over me to spare Jane the ignominy of embarrassment, but ultimately, I was compelled to exhibit the photograph and elucidate her machinations. Having received the comprehensive package from her family, she sought me out in search of solace. "John, is there truly no recourse to alter your resolve regarding divorce?" I contemplated, formulating an idea that she would never agree to this. "Jane, I will not stop the divorce, but I will postpone it on one condition." Her mood improved significantly. "Anything?" "John, be careful when you say that anything is a lot." "I am not worried." She said, "I'm sure you won't go crazy." "What is this condition?" "I will let you date other men as long as I can date other women." I was sure I saw her grin before she hid it behind a sickly sweet smile. "Of course, John. That is fair." What a bet. She was under the impression that I would be unable to find another woman. I then made a statement to the effect that I would not be able to date until I had made an appointment. She appeared excited, as though she had a particular individual in mind and was concerned about the potential consequences of my inability to find a date. I decided to offer her some form of consolation. "If I am unable to find a date within 2 weeks, you will be permitted to go on your date." This elicited one of the most radiant smiles I had observed from her in recent weeks, and she embraced me with great enthusiasm. She kissed me. "That's great, John. Thank you. You'll see this will be just the thing to revitalize our marriage. It will either revive him or result in the dissolution of the marriage within a few days." She was shocked when I informed her of my plans to go on a date with Jane. She assumed that I was bluffing and that I would have a date while she remained single. I had arranged a date that I hoped would put an end to this nonsense once and for all. On Monday, I took a lengthy lunch break to purchase new attire, leaving the garments in my vehicle. On Friday, I departed from my place of employment at an earlier hour to have my hair styled and return home before Jane. I surreptitiously entered the guest room with my new attire and was in the shower when I heard the garage door open. I shaved and brushed my teeth and proceeded to the bedroom to complete my preparations. I believe I startled her when I emerged from the guest room wearing a new ensemble and a new hairstyle, but she swiftly regained her composure. "Robert will pick me up at 6 o'clock. It is acceptable. We have reserved a table with Amelia for 7 o'clock. I have made a reservation in my name in case you arrive before us," I informed Jane as I exited the premises. What Jane was unaware of was that we had a new employee at work. Candid DeSantis was a striking individual with red hair who made a profound impact on everyone. The American man turned his head whenever she passed by. She was completely professional and never engaged in office gossip. We developed a casual friendship. When she flirted with me on occasion, I would politely show her my wedding ring. It is worth noting that she was. Upon inquiring about her availability for drinks after work, I arrived at the bar before she did and was absorbed in my glass when she entered. She inquired about the circumstances that had prompted me to emerge from my reserved demeanor. I explained that a single glance into my eyes had prompted her to abandon her teasing demeanor. "Oh, John, I'm so sorry," she said, placing a warm hand on top of mine. "I didn't mean to tease you, but you're usually so straightforward. You look like you've lost your best friend." My eyes began to water, and I turned away. She put her arm around my shoulders and led me to a table. I took my drink. I sat patiently while I gathered my courage and told her my sad story. She then informed me that there is only one thing we can do. I replied, "Yes, we are. I will be your date." I then laughed for the first time since Jane came up with this crazy idea. She then asked, "Why are you laughing?" "I'm serious." I looked into her eyes for a few moments, expecting a loud caw was emitted, which never came. Finally, I realized that she was serious. "Why me?" "I am aware that you do not date married men. In fact, you rarely interact with single men, either. If they believed that they had a chance, every straight man and half the gay men in the office would be interested in dating you. I am not just in accordance with your assertion that I am free to date any man I choose, I must profess my admiration for you. I believe it may be because you do not always undress me with your eyes. I am aware that you do so on occasion, however, I believe it is only human to err. Nevertheless, you always treat me with respect when we meet. You listen to my ideas and support me. When other men attempt to dismiss them because they originate from me, I am more importantly fond of you and indignant at your spouse for treating you with such disrespect. Are we on a date or not? I may have been born at night, but not last night. You are in my sights. I finished off the remainder of my beverage and proceeded to approach her. The woman gave me her contact information, embraced me in a friendly gesture, and departed. I anticipated that my life would become considerably more intriguing when I arrived at the residence of Candid House. I had barely sufficient time to exit the vehicle and open the door before she reached it. She was slightly taller than Jane, though still shorter than me. Unlike Jane's LBD, her attire was more revealing. The dress Candid wore was slightly longer than knee-length and tight-fitting, with a slit on the left side that extended almost to the thigh. Its emerald green color complemented her wavy, bright red hair, which reached down to her mid-waist. Candid's dress revealed more cleavage than Jane's had ever done, and I found myself assisting her into the vehicle with some difficulty as I sat in the driver's seat. From my vantage point in the driver's seat, I was afforded a view of a creamy white thigh before she straightened her dress and offered me a big smile. She informed me that we had plenty of time for that later on. I felt somewhat awkward from her guttural laugh, as if I wasn't feeling shy enough. She then proceeded to rub my thigh. Fortunately, we arrived at the restaurant before the situation escalated to a point where I was in control as we entered the restaurant. Jane and Robert were already there. I observed Robert on several occasions, but his appearance that evening made no more impression on me than it had on previous occasions. Jane, on the other hand, became visibly agitated, and I can't recall ever seeing her this flushed. Robert didn't rise, so I didn't extend my hand to him. I extended my hand to him, but only nodded to Jane, assisting Candid in rising. Jane was evidently astonished by the quality of my date. I believe she was on the verge of making a witty remark, but ultimately refrained. Robert, on the other hand, was unable to divert his gaze from Candid's cleavage. Jane had to elbow him in the ribs to ensure his eyes remained fixed on the task at hand. I considered the prospect of dinner. Despite an initially hesitant dynamic, a casual observer would have perceived us as two typical couples, rather than husband and wife with different partners. Following dinner, we proceeded to a club where we consumed alcohol and danced. During the faster-paced songs, there were no notable issues. However, when the slower dance began, Candid pressed herself against me, prompting Jane to. Jane's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began rubbing herself against Robert in a manner that suggested she was attempting to engage in sexual intercourse on the dance floor. This behavior attracted attention that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances, but Jane seemed to be in her own world. Robert's hand reached under her dress to caress her breasts, and I felt embarrassed for her. I escorted Candid back to the table, where we observed Jane and Robert's increasingly animated interaction until the manager approached them and tapped them on the shoulder. Despite the distance and the lack of audible communication, it was evident that they were asked to leave. Jane, visibly distressed, hastily gathered her belongings and departed the club with Robert in tow. Heels. You are evidently adept at enjoying oneself with a female companion, Candid observed, his tone indicating a certain degree of mirth. I was only too happy to comply, and we returned to the dance floor when the time came to depart. I approached the manager and expressed my regret for the behavior of our companions. Do not concern yourself with it, the manager replied. There are no complaints. It transpired that my wife, or perhaps I should say my soon-to-be former wife, was the source of the problem. My wife and I surmised that she was somewhat envious of my date. The manager was somewhat perplexed, then gazed at us with curiosity. He said, I understand, with a smile. Please come anytime. He returned to his duties. I escorted my date to her apartment and accompanied her to the door. As I leaned in to give her a friendly goodnight kiss, she surprised me by pulling me towards her for a passionate kiss. She inquired, would you like to come in for a nightcap? I sensed that she had more on her mind than just a nightcap, but I was not in a position to challenge her. The glass was forgotten as soon as the door closed, as she pushed me onto the sofa and straddled my lap. The slit in her dress opened widely, offering me a tantalizing view. She unbuttoned the top of her dress, allowing it to fall to her waist, revealing her firm breasts. She then slid to the floor and unbuttoned my trousers. She performed each action in a painstakingly slow manner, and I was uncertain as to how long I could maintain my composure. She resumed contact with my genitals and drew them closer to me. I disengaged and resumed kissing her. I was momentarily uncertain as to whether Jane had ever permitted me such explicit positions, despite her frequent complaints about the lack of variety in our sexual activities. She stated that it was humiliating, but it was evident that Candid did not share this opinion. I rolled over next to her, and she slid into position next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. As I lay there, a nervous thought occurred to me. Candid, in such excitement, I forgot to use a condom. However, I reassured myself that I was taking my pills. I cupped her chin with my thumb and forefinger, lifted her head, and kissed her gently, sliding my tongue to meet hers. It was unclear how long we had sex, but it seemed like only a few moments had passed as we drifted into blissful sleep. I was uncertain where Jane had gotten the idea that our sex life was lacking. The experience was unremarkable and somewhat tedious. However, based on my interactions with Candid, it became evident that my own conduct was not the primary factor influencing the outcome. We spent the night together, engaged in separate showers and, while she was occupied with her own activities, I prepared breakfast for her. She subsequently informed me that I was a highly skilled lover and an excellent cook. I was compelled to share this information with Candid when we sat down for a meal. I expressed my admiration for her and stated that, in my opinion, our encounter was the most exceptional sexual experience I had ever had. However, I also informed her that I was currently facing significant personal challenges and that my focus was on addressing these issues before pursuing a romantic relationship. The issues in my marriage, even in the event of a divorce, are not yet clear. I am unsure of my readiness for such a transition. I am not currently pursuing other relationships. I was merely jesting with you, John. Please do not misunderstand. I hold positive sentiments towards you both. Should circumstances align, I could conceivably pursue a relationship with you. However, you are correct in that the first step is to resolve matters with your wife. We concluded our meal, engaging in idle chatter until I decided it was time to return home to assess the possibility of salvaging the situation. Upon entering the residence, I observed Jane seated at the kitchen table, grasping a coffee cup. Her eyes were red from weeping. Upon seeing my cheerful demeanor, she began to weep. I took a cup of coffee and sat opposite her. How was your evening with Robert? John, it was regrettable. I could not stop thinking about you and Candid. She is attractive and appealing. I realize that I will never be able to compete with her. If you had not initiated this ill-considered venture, I would not be concerned about competition. She was unable to meet my gaze, but she nodded in agreement. I believe I can state with confidence that you would not experience such regret if it were just you and Robert, and I were left sitting at home alone. She raised her eyes, which were filled with tears. She then lowered her eyes and nodded once more. I am unsure of how to proceed. Part of me desires to terminate the relationship and begin anew with someone else. Jane was now openly weeping. I believe she was contemplating my actions and the situation at large. I then looked at you and saw the woman I had married and fallen in love with. What I observed was not an evil, but a foolish girl, and I hope that there is a way back for us. Jane looked up, hope shining through her tears. I'm going to change my clothes and go out for a while. While I'm gone, I think you should move your things to the guest room. When I return, we will talk again. Please don't make me move, John. It is unclear how we might reconcile our relationship if we remain separated. I require your presence now more than ever. You are unable to comprehend the situation. There is no guarantee that we will be reunited. Perhaps you should have considered the extent of your reliance on me before initiating this course of action. Prior to my departure for the bedroom, Jane was seated at the table. I proceeded downstairs and made my way to the door. John, she said, prompting me to turn around. I simply nodded and departed from the residence. I am aware that my response may appear detached, but I felt compelled to convey the fragility of our marital situation. I proceeded to the Charles River and traversed the shoreline, observing the rowers in their boats and the sailboats. As I sat on a bench overlooking the Charles River, I observed several families with young children. I experienced a sense of melancholy, contemplating the possibility of never encountering the children Jane and I had discussed. The sun began to set, and I became aware of a physical sensation of shivering. I took a deep breath and rose to my feet, setting out on my return journey. Upon entering the house, I discovered Jane still seated where I had left her. She regarded me with a hopeful gaze, yet I merely shook my head in a gesture of sadness and proceeded to my room, where I locked the door behind me. Removing my shoes, I stretched out on the bed, clothed and covering my eyes with my hand. I am unsure of the duration of my repose before I heard. A soft knock on the door was followed by a whisper, "John." I did not respond. After the second attempt, I heard her walk down the hallway into the guest room. After ensuring she had retired for the night, I proceeded to take a shower and experienced a restless sleep. When I went downstairs, I discovered that Jane had prepared a substantial breakfast. I was surprised to find that I had a good appetite, although Jane was just picking at her food. "John," she said, "do you think we could try seeing a psychologist?" I reflected on this proposal. I was unsure how I felt about the prospect of counseling. Would the therapist attempt to persuade me to accept Jane's perspective? If so, I could simply terminate the sessions. I was disinclined to pursue reconciliation. One of the insights I gained from my encounter with Candid was that our sexual relationship had become stale and predictable. Was I truly willing to revert to this state? I was still displeased that Jane had not sought my counsel when she had concerns. I concluded that I had sufficient affection for Jane to sustain our relationship, at least for the time being. I am inclined to concede defeat without a fight. Jane was visibly distressed when I suggested that we consult with a professional. I clarified that I do not require a counselor to save our marriage. The possibility of such a result is uncertain, and I will not tolerate any hidden agendas. I could discern her disappointment. I had been hoping for a new-age psychoanalyst who would agree with her, but she had no choice but to agree. The consultation was surprisingly effective. Jane had to see how her refusal to work with me actually affected her dissatisfaction with our sex life. As a result, I realized we discussed our expectations regarding our sex life in greater detail. Despite the benefits of counseling, I remained preoccupied with the issue of her infidelity. Similarly, Jane continued to struggle with her insecurities. The discussion revolved around Candid, despite my attempts to clarify that although I had some feelings for her, I was not in love with her, and our date was merely a gesture of reconciliation. However, she remained unresponsive to this explanation. Consequently, we opted for an amicable divorce, and once the divorce was finalized, I took stock of my life. I contacted Candid on the day in question. Instead, I reserved a bed and breakfast on the Mana coast. The weather was inclement, but it suited my mood. I was seeking relaxation and introspection, as well as a decision regarding my future plans. I called Candid, and we went to dinner. I allowed her to take me to bed, but the encounter was more. The following morning, as we lay in bed, she inquired, "Penny for your thoughts, John." I reflected on how effortlessly it would be to simply take her in my arms and propose that we spend the rest of our lives together. However, I realized that the simplest path is not always the optimal one. Despite our strong connection, I knew that I needed to consider the implications of such a decision. I am not merely referring to the physical aspect of our relationship. I genuinely care for you and believe that I could easily fall in love with you. However, I am uncertain as to the fairness of such a situation for both of us. My divorce is still a recent and incomplete experience, and I am concerned that it might result in a rebound relationship. I believe it would be more beneficial for us both to explore other relationships for a period of time. I am unsure how long this can last. I will not ask you to wait for me to come to my senses. I would like to argue with you, but I am afraid you are correct. She said, "Although I do believe we will succeed, it is probably better to be sure than to be sorry." We got out of bed, used the bathroom, and then returned to bed. After showering separately and having a quiet breakfast, I was tempted to disregard my reservations and pursue a relationship with her. I believe Candid would have concurred, but I was resolved to pursue other romantic interests. We concluded our cleaning tasks and she escorted me to the door, where we embraced with tears in our eyes. I interpreted this as a final farewell, but she denied it. I respectfully disagree. "Why don't we meet for dinner? I suggest we meet on the second Friday of next month. That way, we can discuss how things are going." She kissed me on the cheek and led me out the door. The sound of the door closing sounded like a cell door. I was uncertain that I hadn't made the worst mistake of my life. I spent the rest of the week on Friday. I was questioning my sanity when I decided to join some friends for dinner and drinks. We sat in a corner booth at the back of the restaurant, facing the door. We were just finishing dessert when I saw her come in with a child. The child was with a tall, handsome man, which was not surprising. I was torn. I was torn between the desire to extend a greeting and the conviction that such an act would be incongruous with the circumstances of our separation. I was disconcerted by the swiftness with which she appeared to move on from me. I suppose I could be described as timid because I waited until she had excused herself to the restroom before placing a gratuity on the table and saying, I bade my friends good night, feeling angry at her for not waiting long to resume her pursuit of me. I was even more angry at myself. We had agreed to this arrangement, and I was confident that I would secure a date for the following Friday. The woman in question was Cheryl Thompson, a secretary for one of my clients. We had previously engaged in some innocuous flirtation. She was aware of my marital status, but she readily agreed when I informed her of my divorce. I had always considered Cheryl to be attractive in a professional context, but I was unprepared for the vision that greeted me at her door. I was taken aback when I arrived at her door, and I believe my surprise was evident. I had prepared myself as much as possible. She stated that I was not adequately prepared, and I replied that I was ready to go. I assisted her in putting on her cloak, and we proceeded. Our dinner conversation was similar to that of a first date, except for one topic. Regarding my divorce, she was taken aback by Jane's actions. I opted to be forthcoming with her over coffee and dessert. Cheryl, I do not wish to mislead you regarding my divorce. I became involved with a woman, and following my divorce, we became quite serious. We were both concerned about the rapid pace at which we were moving forward. We discussed the potential risks of rekindling the relationship and agreed that it might be beneficial to date other individuals for a period of time. I wish to clarify that I am not merely utilizing you as a temporary arrangement. I am genuinely open to whatever may transpire, regardless of the outcome. She exuded a charming demeanor, reminiscent of the character John from the novel. This is merely our inaugural encounter. I do not anticipate any commitment from you at this time. However, I appreciate your candor. As you suggested, let us simply proceed with an open mind and see where this leads once the awkwardness has subsided. We had a very pleasant date, which concluded with a warm kiss on the lips and a date for the following Saturday. Meanwhile, I had a dinner date with Candy. On Friday, I was uncertain about the outcome. I took her hands, and she was as beautiful as always. We conversed casually on the way to the restaurant, but as soon as we placed our orders with the waiter, she became serious. You know, I observed you. I simply raised my eyebrows. I was at dinner and saw you with your friends. I intended to approach you and extend a greeting, but when I emerged from the restroom, you were no longer present. I experienced a moment of embarrassment. Despite our agreement to pursue other romantic interests, I was taken aback by the sight of you with another man so soon. I realize it was an irrational response, but John, you had no reason to be jealous. Stefan and I had not seen an old friend of mine for a considerable period of time. When he called, I took the opportunity to accept his invitation to dinner. I apologize if this caused you any distress. There was no need for you to apologize. Any upset was in my own mind. In fact, it inspired me to get off my backside and ask someone out. We had dinner together last week. Now it was her turn. She inquired whether I should be jealous, her tone suggesting a certain degree of curiosity. I replied that I did not believe so, noting that we had another date scheduled for the following night. We both agreed that there was no commitment, just two individuals getting together for the purpose of having a good time. She responded with a wistful smile, expressing her hope that I would have a good time. The conversation was then redirected to more pleasant topics, and our dinners were served. I inquired as to whether she would like to go dancing, holding the car door for her. She replied that it would be preferable for me to take her home. She drove home in silence, looking out the window. We proceeded to her residence and kissed, perhaps with a greater intensity than intended, and then separated. I encouraged her to stay in touch with me, and she agreed. I then bade her good night and quickly retreated to my vehicle, attempting to assist her inside. The evening with Cheryl was satisfactory, and our parting kiss was more passionate than before, accompanied by some physical contact. However, the relationship ended before it could progress further. Despite maintaining weekly contact with Candid, I did not encounter him again. It is unclear whether our avoidance of each other was subconscious or simply a matter of chance. I saw Cheryl on a few occasions and we eventually engaged in sexual intercourse. While enjoyable, there was no indication of a deeper connection. Cheryl then revealed to me that she believed this should be the last time. She stated that she felt we were moving too quickly and that our relationship was perhaps too good to last. She then proceeded to challenge my own statements, stating that when we first began our relationship, we had agreed to no commitment. She then reiterated that she was not seeking a commitment herself. She then informed me that she had developed feelings for me and that she believed that if we continued, we might have a future together. However, she stated that she was not yet ready to take that step and that she would prefer to experience the pain of rejection rather than move forward. It is preferable to acknowledge the depth of one's feelings before they become too intense, as this will facilitate the process of moving on when the inevitable pain arises. This is a challenging situation, and it is difficult to articulate the extent of the pain without it becoming overwhelming. However, it is important to recognize that one can survive such a situation and emerge stronger. After dressing, Cheryl kissed her forehead and headed towards the door. She said goodbye to John and goodbye to me, Cheryl. Tears were visible in her eyes as she closed the door. I reflected on my next move. I decided to pursue a series of relationships with different women, some of whom were one-night stands. I engaged in sexual intercourse with numerous women, although none of these relationships were serious. Eventually, I became aware of what was lacking in my life and proceeded to contact her via telephone. "Hello," she said. "It's me, John," I replied, forgetting that she had caller ID. "I don't know how you are doing, but I don't worry about selections anymore. I had more rebounds than pinballs, and I'm on the rise. If I can still be with you, I want to go home." There was silence on the other end of the line. And I was afraid that I had missed my chance. "How soon can you come?" Jane did not leave town in disgrace and lived a lonely life surrounded by her cats. She certainly was not looking for work in a Mexican brothel, while I was not really. I saw Cheryl a few more times and we actually ended up in bed. It was enjoyable, but there was no spark. As we lay in bed after our third night of sex, Cheryl then revealed that she had been considering ending their relationship, stating that it should be the last time. She felt that they had been moving too quickly and that their lack of commitment was not conducive to a healthy relationship. Cheryl acknowledged that she had not been looking for a commitment when they first started dating and that she did not want one now. However, she expressed her concern that if they continued, they might develop stronger feelings for each other. Cheryl stated that she was not ready to end the relationship and that she would rather end it before those feelings intensified. As emotions intensify, the pain that follows can be significant. I hope this makes sense in a strange way. This is so I can articulate that it is painful, but I will endure it. I got dressed, kissed her forehead, and proceeded to the door. "Good night, Cheryl." "Goodbye, John," she said with a sad smile, tears sparkling in her eyes, as she closed the door. I reflected on my next move. My next step involved a series of women, some of whom were one-night stands and some of whom were. After numerous relationships, some of which were casual, I finally identified the void in my life and called her. "Hello," she said. "It's me, John," I replied, forgetting that she had caller ID. "I don't know how you are doing, but I don't worry about selections anymore. I had more rebounds than pinballs, and I'm on the rise. If I can still be with you, I want to go home." There was silence on the other end. I was concerned that I had missed my opportunity. "How soon could you come?" Jane did not leave town in disgrace and lived a lonely life surrounded by her cats. She was not seeking employment in a Mexican brothel, and I was not interested in learning more. Mutual friends informed me that she was dating, although there did not appear to be anyone she was seriously involved with. Candid expressed a desire to invite Jay to the wedding, although I was not in favor of this. I was not opposed to the idea, but Jane declined, sending a gift. I was surprised when Candid initiated a casual friendship with Jane, meeting occasionally for coffee or shopping. I did not object, although I considered it unusual. Approximately 6 months after our marriage, I returned home to find Candid dressed to go out. I anticipated that this would be a recurrence of previous events. Fortunately, my concerns proved unwarranted. "I am aware that you two have become quite friendly, but I believe this is somewhat excessive. There is a rationale behind my actions, which I am sure you will understand. I could not argue with her when she had a plan in mind, so I simply acquiesced and went to change. Jane was already waiting for me in the same place and described the situation as highly awkward. Candid and Jane greeted each other with kisses. Jane greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, while I stood there feeling awkward and unsure of how to respond. Neither of us seemed to know what to do. Then, Jane spoke. "Good to see you, John. You look good." "Thank you." "Jane, you look good too." We were spared further awkwardness when we were shown to our table. Candid paused for a moment, saying something to the men behind the counter. I asked, "What does all of this mean?" When she caught up with us, she replied, "You don't have to worry about it. Honey," she said, "every husband knows that when his wife says nothing, it means something, and he should be concerned." However, there was nothing I could do except play along and hope for the best. Jane sat to my right, opposite, and before we could order drinks, the owner came up to Stefan and stood him up, gave him a friendly hug, and seated him on my left, opposite Jane, and her insidious plan became obvious while I was gratified to discover that my worst fears had been unwarranted. The evening appeared to have the potential to become a disaster. However, Jane and Stefan appeared to enjoy each other's company, and their conversation flowed smoothly throughout dinner. It seemed that we were like four old friends. It was a short-lived interlude, and it was soon time to leave. Stefan and I split the check, and while Jane and Stefan were leaving, they decided to continue the evening at the restaurant bar. Candid was particularly despite my initial reservations, I was unable to muster any anger. It was evident that their relationship was off to a promising start. We maintained cordial, if distant, relationships with Jane and Stefan. However, we rarely communicated as couples, although we often met in groups. It appeared that they had a stable relationship. Jane no longer seemed to require the excitement of a more dynamic relationship. We extended our best wishes to them. The act of kicking the baby during the night seemed to have a pronounced effect on her, waking her up. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel to ensure that your second child does not engage in infidelity. We will now proceed to the next story, which is of a more intriguing nature.